On North America's east coast, the raging rivers pump life into the mainland. Hungry cormorants feast on fish swimming inland to spawn. The circle of life and death along the river. On the jagged coast of Canada's eastern shore, a delicate and diverse ecosystem thrives on the fringes of the continent. Welcome to the Wild Wild East. The rivers of Nova Scotia. These channels carry water, the source of all life, through the province's mainland. This is the Shubenacadie River. It stretches inland to connect the Bay of Fundy and Grand Lake. Millions of fish travel this route each year as they swim upstream to spawn. It's springtime in the Wild Wild East. Animal life dives headfirst into the river. Whether you're visiting for the season or just emerged from a winter nap, the water's flow brings life to all. But for predator species, the river provides more than water. A fact this muskrat knows all too well. Animals live at different stops along the river. But below the surface, another species is just passing by. Meandering upstream is the American shad. The fish are on a journey from the Atlantic Ocean to the river's source, Grand Lake. Shad spend most of their life in the ocean, but once they mature, they swim upstream into freshwater lakes to spawn. They're what's called an anadromous fish. During this journey, the shad's body goes through an incredible change. Leaving the salt water of the ocean, their gills, lungs, and kidneys transform to allow them to breathe in the fresh water of the river. It is one of the most fantastic and elaborate transformations in the Wild Wild East. Fish don't make this journey until they reach maturity, which can take up to 5 years. These big swimmers can grow as long as a human arm. The shad swim from the Atlantic waters of Florida through the Bay of Fundy and then travel upriver to Grand Lake. Once they've spawned, these shad will turn around and head back to the ocean. But there's more than one fish along the river highway. Further up the Shubenacadie, a run of Gaspereaux. They are the American shad's little cousin, about a quarter of the size. Outside of the Maritimes, the fish is called an alewife. But here, in the Wild Wild East, it still goes by the name the Acadian people gave it over 400 years ago, Gaspereaux. Another anadromous fish, these guys are traveling the same road upstream to their ancestral spawning grounds. Both the shad and the Gaspereaux possess incredible homing abilities. The fish spawning for the first time this spring have not swum in fresh water for as many as 5 years. And still, their sense of smell leads them up the same river that first gave them life. This is the gateway into Nova Scotia's northwestern river system. The gatekeepers? A colony of double-crested cormorants, eagerly awaiting the fish moving upstream to spawn. Researchers estimate that there are close to 1,000 mature birds that return here each year. That's about a third of the human population on the other side of the harbor. The cormorants flourish at the mouth of the river thanks to this ample food supply. They return each spring to breed and raise their families. Of the 40 different species of cormorants across the world, the double-crested is the most common in North America. If it were breeding season, you'd see 2 tufts of feathers protruding from the bird's head, like horns. Hence the name double-crested. But the honeymoon period is over, and in each nest, there are mouths to feed. By nesting in large colonies like this one, any one of the 1,000 cormorants here can raise the alarm bell should a predator be seen. Down in the water, a dutiful husband collects seaweed to line the inside of his nest. Above, his wife takes care of some repairs. The unspoken compromise of a cormorant partnership. Both mom and dad share the responsibility of maintaining a nest and raising chicks. The colony's nestlings are between 4 and 7 weeks old, depending on when the cormorant arrived and how soon they found a mate. Most aren't ready to fly the coop yet. Their fuzzy brown feathers aren't equipped for flight. Cormorants can live upwards of 20 years, but the first is by far the most important. To make it through year number 1, it will take a bit of luck, escaping the grasp of unwanted predators. Underneath these waters swim the main ingredient in the cormorant's diet: fish. Fortunately, there's no shortage of those at the mouth of the river. When this causeway was built, it dammed off the mouth of 2 of the 3 rivers that empty into Pictou Harbor. So, any migratory fish returning inland have no choice but to swim right by the cormorants. These man-made obstructions can cause some confusion for the animals of the wild, wild east. This groundhog was just trying to track down some berries and grubs when he found himself halfway across the harbor. And amongst the causeway's rocks, a gull finds a crab. The cormorants like those too, but they prefer fish and spend a large portion of each day looking for them. They propel themselves underwater with their thick, webbed feet. When they reach striking distance, the cormorant tries to pierce the fish with its hooked bill. Unsuccessful, this cormorant shakes off its defeat. Unlike other aquatic birds, the cormorant's feathers don't repel water. So, after a dip in the ocean, this guy spreads its wings to dry off. This pose is something of a trademark for the cormorant. It's not just unique, it's useful too. A soaking wet cormorant is heavier, sinks faster, and can dive deeper. Stuck in their nest, the chicks rely on their parents to fish for them. Like most birds, cormorants feed their chicks through regurgitation. There's a bit of a sibling rivalry amongst the brothers and sisters. The hungry chicks compete for their parents' attention. And as the saying goes, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. When the birds are very young, they only feed out of the tip of the adult's bill. It obviously doesn't take them long to figure out there's a whole lot more where that came from. The parents partially digest the food before vomiting it back up. The chicks then feed out of the pouch between the bird's bill and its neck. The nestlings are just on the verge of fledging and need lots to eat during this final stage of rapid growth. They're like hungry teenagers. This time of year, Mom and Dad fish non-stop to feed themselves and their growing family. The cormorant isn't the only bird living off the fish at the mouth of the river. A bald eagle soars nearby. The cormorants raise the alarm bell. At the top of the food chain, the bald eagle will eat anything it can kill. Right now, it's looking for a cormorant nestling. Mature cormorants can fly and have a better chance to evade this predator. But their young are confined to the nest and at serious risk. Their only protection is their parents hiding them from the eagle's sharp eye. With the predator flying away, the cormorants can leave their nests and return to the water. This was a scouting mission for the eagle and a close call for the cormorants. The eagle is an opportunistic hunter. And with so many nestlings of the colony right now, he won't fly far. Still, for now at least, the nestlings are safe. The mouth of the Shubenacadie, where the river ends and the ocean begins. The shad and the Gaspereau begin their journey upstream here. Each year, 5 to 10 million fish pass through the muddy waters of the Bay of Fundy. At its eastern tip, the world's highest tide empties into the Shubenacadie. The collision of water alters the flow of the river. This unique phenomenon is called a tidal bore. At low tide, you can stand waist deep in the middle of the river. But within an hour of the Bay of Fundy's tide turning, the water would be 2 stories over your head. As they move upriver, the fish cross a passenger heading in the opposite direction. A harbor seal, trying to catch its next meal. The path upstream is never as simple as point A to point B, and soon the fish hit a fork in the road. When these fish were just born, the smell of their original river left an imprint on them. Using this sensory memory, they chart their course home. Some shad and Gaspereau continue down the Shubenacadie, while others exit onto Stewiacke River. But it isn't long before the Stewiacke swimmers run into one of their most common predators: the angler. Here, along the Stewiacke River, they compete in what's known as a shad derby. Each angler is trying to catch the largest shad possible. The bigger, the better. The fish will serve a purpose. Nearby, there's an eagle rehabilitation center and all the shad caught today will be fed to the eagles in recovery. The annual community event has been going on for 20 years now. The river always finds a way to bring living things together above and below the water. Eagles usually catch their own fish, but the injured birds in recovery will be happy to receive a helping hand from the human world. Meanwhile, the shad along the Shubenacadie are facing a different challenge. This trap is called a fishing weir. It's set here annually to harvest the spring runs of Gaspereau and shad. Fishing weirs have been set along tidal rivers across the world for at least 10,000 years, though it's likely they've existed even longer. The trap works by blocking off a section of the river. The weir forces the fish to swim into nets placed underwater. At its peak in the 20th century, over 500,000 shad were fished annually in the Wild Wild East. But the bony fish is difficult to prepare, and it has fallen out of favor with the general public. These fish will be used to bait lobsters. But some fish sneak through. The fishermen can't catch them all. Angling and fishing weirs are carefully regulated in the Wild Wild East. This ensures the shad and Gaspereau can make it back to spawn. If they don't, it will disrupt the delicate balance of the river. In less than 6 weeks, the cormorant nestlings along Pictou Harbor will be able to fly. Confined to the nest, they rely completely on their parents. Flight brings them independence, but also a defense. The eagle has re-emerged to stalk the cormorant colony, and the parents do their best to shield the nestlings. The eagle takes off. Circling back, it snatches a baby cormorant. The cormorant species are built to sustain loss. The death of one nestling will not destroy the colony. There's strength in numbers. And here, in the Wild Wild East, the future is strong for the double-crested cormorant. Back along the Shubenacadie, the Gaspereau have almost reached the river's source, Grand Lake. The lake takes them all the way into Nova Scotia's mainland. It is the end of the journey, and it's just around the river's bend. The fish have fought their way upriver, found luck where others haven't. When they arrive home, they will spawn and welcome the next generation of Gaspereau. But man has placed one final obstacle in their path: a pair of metal culverts. The water, tunneled through these two holes, rushes against the frantic Gaspereau, bubbling, churning, spinning. But on the other side, calm. The ancestral spawning grounds of the Gaspereau. And so the fish fight the culvert's frenzied flow. It's not easy for the little guys, and it takes a lot of gumption. But they swim. Just when it seems they've made it into the tunnel, the water's force pushes them back. One by one, the fish make it into the tunnel. The journey upstream is a marathon, and this is the final sprint. On the other side of the culvert, the Gaspereau have arrived at the source of the Shubenacadie River to spawn. A single female Gaspereau may release anywhere between 60 and 200,000 eggs during spawning. Of course, not all of these become little fish. Once born, things like water temperature, presence of predators, and food availability all influence whether or not larval Gaspereau will grow big enough to make the long trip back to the ocean. When they travel downriver for the first time, they'll go through their own transformation, preparing their internal organs for salt water. The time this transformation takes is genetically programmed to be the same amount of time as their journey downstream to the ocean. And so, at the beginning of that next journey, this one ends. The Gaspereau and shad have ensured the future of their species for another year. Rivers are the bloodline of the natural world, pumping life through the wild, wild east. In their natural form, they flow and churn in relation to the formation of the earth. They bring together humans, birds, fish, all living creatures. In a few months, the Gaspereau and shad born this spring will need to make their first journey down the river to the Atlantic Ocean. It will be years before they'll swim in the Shubenacadie again. The cormorants in Pictou Harbor will fly south again this winter, but you can be sure they'll return again next year. They've made these waters their home. Life in the wild can seem like a cruel numbers game for species low on the food chain. But such is the delicate balance of the natural world. A river runs through the wild, wild east.